Hello and welcome. I'm Kate.
And I'm Emily, and this is Beyond the Neurotype,
A podcast that explores what it's like to be human affirming, regardless of labels, considerate of every person's individual needs, and allowing us to, ideally, understand what is behind every individual's actions, choices, and needs.
We do this with curiosity and love as we explore these individual and unique experiences that are rich with challenges, growth, and grace.
I'm Kate, a mental health social worker and synergetic play therapist. I'm the co-founder of the Village Therapy Hub. I'm a mum to 2 adolescents, and I love understanding and exploring what is happening beneath the surface for children and adults, and what behaviours are communicating to us. But let me keep it real. Much like yours, my life is a roller coaster. So I also understand the complexities of being a carer, the challenges of the day-to-day, and I won't pretend it's all enjoyable.
I'm Emily, a neurodivergent mum to a beautiful autistic girl and wife to a wonderful autistic man. I'm passionate about celebrating neurodiversity and creating a community where people are seen, held, and loved for who they truly are. It is my hope that as you listen to the stories of our beautiful guests, you feel inspired, validated, and supported in your journey.
This podcast is recorded on the land of the Dja Dja Wurrung people. We offer our heartfelt gratitude to the traditional custodians and elders, past, present, and emerging, for continued opportunities to learn, reflect, and grow. It's been hard for me to think of what to say when introducing Lisa. Not because I can't think of anything to say, but because there are so many things to say. Lisa and I attended a training together a couple of years ago now and noticed each other across the room. We've been connecting in the most unpredictable ways since. Lisa has created a life for herself and her family that's rooted in every individual member's needs. She's shaped their environment to cater for those needs, and that has meant, amongst other things, moving interstate. The way she lives to understand what her children need and how she can scaffold their development in the most connected way is nothing but inspiring. I'm thrilled to introduce to you all to Lisa today.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Emily. It's lovely to be here with you.
Lisa, I mentioned in my intro that you've moved interstate to better meet the needs of yourself and your family. Can you tell us what led to you making that decision?
Yes. So we actually landed in Queensland from Victoria in December 2022. So I'm just going back in time now. So we spent all of COVID in Victoria. And at that point, we were living quite remotely on the border between country Victoria and Metro Melbourne. And having lived through COVID and then coming out the other side, that was a really, I guess, intense period of learning for us as a family together. And as we emerged out the other side of that, I stumbled across a coaching world that is quite unique in terms of the lens that it uses and the lens that it brings to understanding the human condition. And its heart is in epigenetics. And so being the person that I am, I learned to love, I love learning rather. And I'm always, as a mother, I'm always wanting to be able to better understand myself, better understand my children. And so I jumped in, which is again very characteristic of me, and immersed myself in this new world. And it really helped me understand that as people living together as a family, we all had or all have very different and very unique preferences, if you like, and these are driven by our biology. And so it was really the new knowledge that I had and that I was continuing to grow through further work with it within this coaching lens, if you like, to that was like, how can I curate the environment around us that really brings us alive and helps us feel the best that we can and helps us feel really good in our bodies and helps us thrive in our relationships. And so it really, I think, looking back on it, and I love the question, Kate, because it really invites me to reflect. And often we don't do that in our lives because we're so in whatever's happening and we don't take the time to actually reflect. It was an opportunity for us to really take a step back, and we were coming out of COVID at quite a point where we were feeling quite stuck as a family. A couple of years before that, had decided to leave the corporate world because it was affecting my mental health, but I didn't really understand why. And both of my children at that time, for a number of different reasons, including COVID, were now homeschooling, and were really struggling to participate in life. And so I knew that there was something else, something that I was missing. And this really helped fill a gap in my knowledge and really gave me, I guess it gave me a way to understand behavior in a completely different way. And to understand that, behavior really is information. And the way that we behave is an expression of how well our environment is matched to who we are. And so understanding myself now through a different lens, understanding my children and my husband, and some of the new opportunities that were opening up because of COVID, I was able to take that knowledge and say, I believe that there is a lot of value for all of us in terms of our health and well-being in actually moving interstate, choosing a climate that's much more well matched to who we are. And so it became a very empowered, a very intentional, unconscious decision. And in fact, something that I manifested down to the exact date that we actually arrived in where we now live in Harvey Bay. So it was an incredible process. It happened like over 4 months from making the decision to actually arriving in Harvey Bay. And we were tested every step of the way. And that was purely, a test of our resolve and our commitment that this is really what we wanted. And yeah, we are home now.
Amazing.
So it was an incredible journey. Yeah.
Listening to your story there, I'm really curious about how you came to understand your individual preferences for living and what that process looked like for you, your family.
Yeah, it's a great question. It could be a very big answer. I know we've only got a certain amount of time here. But essentially, Emily, it comes back to an understanding that hormones have a significant role in how they shape our behavior. And so every one of us is unique. We all have unique brains and nervous systems. And we all have one or two dominant hormones that shape who we are. And when I use the word shape, I use that quite, to quite broadly, really, because it shapes height, size, what we look like, but it also shapes how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive the world around us. It shapes our natural rhythms and how we respond to stimuli around us. So it allows us to develop an understanding of a person about what are your natural behaviors, and what does your behavior look like when you're experiencing stress and challenge, and what does your behavior look like when you're in balance and in flow. And so when we have that information, it allows us to then be really intentional and conscious about how we support the environment around the person so that we can really create a match between the person's environment and who they are. And that environment could be, you know, some really practical things like food and movement, but it can also be the internal workings like mindset and mind and how that person the best social environments for that person, or the best way that they can really bring their genius out into the world and be supported in the workplace.
That has led to you making like significant choices around how each individual in your family's lives look. You know, you've got two children and both of them have different ways of being in the world, and you've set up different ways of supporting them, and then, you know, yourself and your husband as well.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about, or could you talk a little bit about what that like actually looks like?
Bring some tangible
Yeah, some
to
really
it.
concrete,
Yeah,
specific examples.
yeah. And as you asked that question, Kate, where my energy goes is really bringing to life what we understand about humans is that we're creatures of rhythm. You know, we rise with the sun and we go to bed with the sun, and we have seasons and everything. And so, you know, at the heart of everything is our natural rhythm, and that's different for different people. And yeah, I would love to make the point at this early stage in the conversation is that I think, or what I'm curious about in the world is that how much of the stress that we experience in our day-to-day lives is because we are unique people being asked to live in a very same way in a society that is trying to ask us to live all the same way or eat the same way, or you know, that kind of thing. So
Yes, absolutely.
yeah, you know, and one of I guess one of the most obvious examples around children is school. um, Schools are set up to teach in a certain way, and where they can personalize, they will. And I think teachers do an incredible job. I really do. Um, and at the same time, it's more that the system hasn't moved with, you know, the evolution of the human being,
Mm.
and the need to support that individuality. But let's bring it back to my sort of my world, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So I have two children, 18 months apart, and quite different in their biologies. So one of them very much her when you look at her, she's very tall and very lean. And then the other one is very strong physically in her body. So there's quite a physical difference in their biologies, but that also translates through to how they perceive their world and how they interact with the world. So one of the older one, she's very, very sensitive to her environment. So her senses are very upregulated, if you like. And she needs to recharge by being away from people. So she loves to have small doses of socialization, but being around people for too long is actually a real drain on her energy. And when you compare that to my other child, her energy is actually gained by being around people. When she's on her own, that's when her mood can really shift and change. So, you know, we obviously we have a family environment which is the same for both of them, but I've got two children who have different biological preferences. And so part of having this epigenetic lens is understanding that difference about them, and then setting up our day, thinking about where we live, how we flow through our day, so the actual rhythm of the family, so that we can support all of that, and everybody's natural preferences are met, because when those biological needs are met, then that feeling of fulfillment is much higher. And when we feel fulfilled, we feel more motivated. We are able to participate more. We're able to engage more. And so this is really, I guess, breaking it down to a very simple level, is when we can match the environment to the person so that those biological needs are being met in a way that that person feels fulfilled, then their participation in life is much greater. And we see behaviors that show us that they are feeling good in themselves, and that they are feeling seen for who they are and accepted for who they are. And yeah, it's just been incredible learning and growing together. And I don't always get it right. I'm a mum, and I'm not here to say that I'm perfect or anything, because that's not the point, right? The point is that we're learning and growing together, and rupture and getting it wrong is inevitable, but it's also necessary. And there is so much growth when that happens, because there's information in that process. And that is what we're practicing, is when we can tune into the information, then there's no need for judgment or anything else. It's just, okay, this is information. How can I use this to continue to grow and support you and support myself? Yeah.
And so, how have you found that physical interstate move? How is that? Obviously, it's been wonderful for your family, but how, I suppose, what in your family's biology suits Hervey Bay better than where you were in Victoria, and what's kind of the concrete differences there?
Yeah. So a slight funny story to this is I'm originally from the UK, and now understanding my biology, my biology thrives in a consistently warm, sunny environment. And so being born in the UK, that was actually a mismatch from the beginning, right? So incredibly, well, looking back, nothing is an accident. I intentionally came to Australia about 20 years ago and chose Melbourne. And having this new understanding, living in Melbourne, I was noticing that I was really experiencing shifts in mood, shifts in energy, a lot of anxiety when the weather cooled down, particularly where we lived, because it was an elevated area. We tended to have long spells of cold, damp weather. And I also noticed that my children were much more withdrawn and didn't want to be outside. So I just had this inner knowing that Queensland was somewhere I needed to be. And that was quite early on coming to Australia. So when some other things shifted, being able to work remotely for my husband post-COVID, there really was nothing tethering us to Melbourne. So, and Hervey Bay was calling. I'd actually never been to Hervey Bay, but again, it was just one of those intuitive knowings in my heart that this was the place to be. And so we made the move, and even down to choosing the lifestyle that we have right now, downsizing, taking away the need to look after land and property, being close to the beach, being walking distance to the beach. Both my husband and my youngest daughter really benefit from being around bodies of water. So being on the coast is brilliant for that. We do have a little bit more humidity here from time to time, but not too much that it impacts me. So that was really the consciousness around, I guess, the consciousness around choosing Hervey Bay matched with my inner knowing. And we chose this house And then I've come to understand that it's really important that I have a house that I can let the breeze through, that's north facing, that I have really easy access to the beach. So it's all really just, fallen into place
Mm.
quite beautifully. And we have longer sunshine hours, we have a more stable climate, we don't have the daylight savings. Even that hour change would really impact everybody. So there's just a lot more steadiness and a lot more consistency for everybody in terms of the climate up here and where we've chosen to live.
Yeah, it's amazing how that it does impact your day-to-day life, doesn't it? Where
Yeah.
you are and your environment, and yeah, it just
I think
makes so
it's
much
really
sense.
interesting how so I went through the epigenetic mapping process with Lisa because of course this is really interesting and I wanted to know. But what I was really like, how I landed in my house was a series of accidental events that, just it all just felt like this was the house I was supposed to be living in. And I had no real understanding of why that was. And then I did this mapping, probably 7 years after I've been living in this house. And when I saw the environments that are for me to live in, I was like, oh, it wasn't an accident at all, This is exactly the environment that I need to be around. Um, but it was a very confronting experience. There was lots of things that I guess there was things that came up for me that I knew about myself, but I didn't promote about myself. I would never have stepped into that part of my being. I would never have talked to people about that. I would never have fully owned that part of myself. And so actually through having it put to me in black and white with scientific data backing it was actually really hard and left me feeling quite wonky for a period of time, potentially still in that process in a lot of ways. Was that an experience for you too, Lisa?
Yes, and I just want to honor your honesty and vulnerability in sharing that, Kate, because I think um, it is part of the process.
Mm.
Um, you know, hearing you relate your experience of choosing your home and then having some aha moments around why it works for you so well. I think we live in a world that is continually trying to pull us out of our bodies and away from our intuition and our knowing. And to
Yeah.
have as you say, a black and white uh, profiling process that is actually scientifically backed and draws actually on ancient wisdom going back to Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, interpersonal neurobiology. It combines so many different areas of science to then have this black and white, like, this is who you are when
Mm.
you have potentially being conditioned to live a certain way because of the different environments that you've lived in, the people that you've been around, the workplaces that you've been in, all that kind of thing. It can feel confronting.
Mm.
And I did my training in June 2021. So this has been a process. This is not something that, I just went, oh, right, great, this is me. This has been an evolutionary process. And there have been lots of up and downs. There's been confronting moments. And really getting to some extent, there's I guess the immediate stuff around supporting the body and the physiology and understanding physiological rhythms. And then there's the other aspect to it, which really gets deep into understanding how you relate to people, including yourself, really starting with yourself and how you relate to people around you and how you show up as a parent. And I think that's a really important point. What's the saying? Oh, help me out here. We see the world. Oh, I can't remember what it is, but basically what I'm trying to illustrate is that when you can understand the person in front of you through the lens of their biology, it invites you to show up as the person that they need you to be rather than the person that you are. And so it allows you to understand your own biological bias for how you move through the world and how you relate to people. And that's not necessarily going to be the same way that the person in front of you sees the world and relates to you. And so you and that other person can be experiencing something together, but what I take away from it and what my daughter takes away from it can be completely different. And so, again, this is a way of understanding behavior without judgment, that this stimuli that is unfolding in front of me, my body is interacting with that in a different way to the way that my daughter's body is interacting with that and her mind. And therefore, we're having different responses. And who am I to say that my response is better or worse than hers? I'm not. It's just a response which is congruent with her natural biology and congruent with whether she's perceiving that as a threat or something that she feels safe. So, yeah, I actually cannot remember the question you asked, Kate, but that's where I ended up.
No, that's perfect. And I love that you've actually just raised congruency, because I think that's a big piece, isn't it? That, in my experience, we live lives that feel largely incongruent. And, that we've got some internal messaging happening and it's kind of suggesting one thing, but, oh no, this is what's expected of me in this environment. So I'll keep on going with the expectation no matter what it's doing to my own internal self. So, this idea that we can experience congruency, like,
Mm,
it feels almost fanciful in a lot of ways, but it's real. It's a possibility.
yeah, yeah. And it can be incredibly hard in the world that we live in
Yeah.
because of the external expectations around us. And so what this has given me, I believe, and what I'm coming to understand to be true for myself is, no, this is me. This is actually who I am, and that's okay. Like I
Mm.
don't have to be that person or that person. I don't have to do that because, and the more I sit with this and I work with this and I live this way, I actually feel like it's awakening the voice of my intuition and it's strengthening that, if that makes sense. It's really allowed me to come home to myself in a different way, an unexpected way. Um, yeah.
Mm. As you're speaking, I'm recalling how wonky I got, and I'm now remembering why. I'm thinking, of course, I got wonky. It
Yeah,
kind of called everything into question,
that's right. Yeah.
and it did. I ended up actually, contacting you, Lisa, and saying, can we have a conversation? Because I feel like I'm having a breakdown. Like, I feel like my brain has broken and I
Mm,
no longer know how to function
mm,
in the world. And I needed some normalizing around the fact that when we actually start to unmask and step into our authenticity and actually listen to our intuition, it's so polarizing, because we've built this entire life based on shoulds and expectations and conforming and masking, and it's kept us safe and it's served its purpose and it's all of those things. So of course, when we start to layer some of that off, it's really scary, really confronting.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
having a mirror held up to where the incongruence is, like, is that?
Mm.
Yeah. I really love the way that you've brought that to life.
Mm.
Yeah. 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 That's
Mm.
really clear. And what just came up for me then, Kate, when you were talking? It's I think when you mention like the conformity that we've lived, and then it's then challenging that challenge in itself can be perceived by the brain as a threat, right? And so we're in this state of like confusion, right? It's like, do I go back to like over there is actually true me, but that's unfamiliar,
Mm.
right? That's a
Yeah.
threat because I don't know that. How do I know that that's safe? But over
Yeah.
here is not necessarily for me. There's some masking, there's some conformity, there's the shoulds, but this is what I'm used to.
Mm.
This feels safe, right? So making that step, it takes courage, it takes bravery, um,
Mm.
and it's a process. And I think
Mm.
the last 12 months for me have really um, taught me a lot of self-compassion as part of the process,
Yeah.
um, an unconditional positive regard.
Yeah.
That's really important.
Yeah.
I'm
Unconditional positive regard for self. Whoa.
what is this?
Yeah.
As someone who doesn't have a very strong understanding of epigenetics, I'm really curious about what the process of the epigenetic mapping is that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I don't really know anything about that. So
Okay, so let me try and bring some tangibility to this while being succinct. So let's see where we go. Um, so really, let's just start with some of the understanding of the science. So um, when we first come to be as a group of cells that is as an embryo, as that interacts, again, we've got the womb environment interacting with a body of cells. That interaction gives rise to your development as an embryo being driven by one or two dominant hormones. And those hormones become your dominant endocrinology. And that's what gives rise to your appearance, your height, your shape, how your preferences for learning, your preferences for being in relationship with other people, how you respond to stimuli, even whether you are more naturally parasympathetic or more naturally sympathetic in your nervous system. And obviously, that has an influence on how you perceive your world and respond to the world around you. What the profiling process does is we take measurements of the body, and that data is fed into an algorithm. And that runs thousands and thousands of computations, comparing the ratios of those measurements. And then it takes the output from that and matches it with other information that we collect when we work with people in the profiling process that go into appearance. So hair, eyes, nails, general appearance of the body, and also family history, lifestyle questions, that kind of thing. And it takes all that information together. And then at the end of that, what it gives you is an understanding of generally across the world population of humans where your biology sits. And we call this a health type or a biotype. And it helps us understand that your biology is either more, and I'm going to use some terms and explain them, mesomorph, ectomorph, or endomorph. And those terms really just help us understand which parts of the body have received more energy in development in the womb. So a mesomorph, the energy goes to the muscles, the ligaments, the tendons, the heart, those systems. With an ectomorph, it's the energy is directed towards the skin and the nervous system. And then for endomorph, it's all the other organs, particularly the digestive system. And that then has implications for our natural rhythms, whether we're night owls or early birds, how to support our bodies with food and movement and all those kinds of things. So it's not just about what we eat or the type of exercise we're doing, but when we're doing it. So that it really helps you match your environment to who you are. Yeah, so, and even just to bring an extra layer of tangibility to that, for a mesomorph, testosterone is one of the dominant hormones, and that can actually be identified by looking at the this finger. This is the ring finger. So that will, in individuals where testosterone is higher, that finger will actually be longer than the index finger.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so
Are we all testing that now?
Yeah.
and there's other hormones will give rise to a thicker neck or a longer femur. So these hormones have an incredible impact on how the body forms. And just to put one foot into more the spiritual way of understanding this, if I may, and I just love this, so I really want to express this. It really helps us come back to an acceptance of self, that we are all unique, right? And the bodies that we are in are perfectly designed to carry out our purpose for being here, right? And my purpose is different to your purpose, Kate, is different to your purpose, Emily, because I have a completely different body. And therefore, I don't need to compare myself to anybody else, because I actually have everything that I need right here.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
sorry, would it be okay if I just mention one more thing? Because this is something that is at the heart of my purpose and my passion. When you can understand a child through this lens, particularly from an early age in an environment such as school, where you understand who they are, why they are the people that they are, and the best way to engage with them, the best way to communicate with them, you allow that person, that young person, to be who they are, right? And they get to be who they are. And I just think that is the greatest gift that we can do for anybody, is to allow them to be who they are and allow them to bring their genius into the world.
Yeah. And would I be right in thinking that in children, a lot of this information is highly observable because they actually haven't come up against all the molding that society is, me falling apart at my age getting this information is very different because, I've spent 42 years conforming.
Yeah.
But for children, a lot of this information can be gained just from watching. What do
Yeah.
they actually spend their time doing? How do they move their body? Do they complain at certain temperature changes? When do they want to be outside? When do they want to be inside? What kind of clothing do they wear? Like, you get a lot of information about whether they prefer to be warm or cold, how they want to use their body, what works for them in terms of times to eat. The kid that doesn't want to ever eat at the constructed lunchtime at school, but is always hungry, middle of the afternoon learning session. Okay, so they're a child whose body actually eats at a different time to the
Yeah.
scheduled time.
Yes, absolutely. And when, let's use the example of a child who moves out of say a kinder environment, which is built around play-based learning. There is a lot of outdoor movement possible, and There's more flexibility around supporting the child with their rhythms around eating and resting and all that kind of thing. And it's much more child-led. So the child is actually able to, okay, what do I need right now? And that need is met. And they move into a more mainstream traditional education system where there is a set schedule, they're expected to learn in a certain way, they're expected to sit still for longer and all that kind of thing. And if this is a child who is naturally designed to move first and they actually need to move their body in order to engage their mind, but they are told to sit down and then movement doesn't happen till the end of the day, they naturally have a high metabolism, so they need to eat more frequently. They need to learn and use energy in bursts and then rest, right? This is might be natural for a child, but when you put that into a system that doesn't support that, you get friction, you get incongruence, right? And how does that show up in behaviors? The child may not engage, they might start to mess around, they may not be able to focus. And then we start to go, I wonder if there's something else happening for this child. Could this be, ADHD or something like this? Now, I'm not a doctor. I'm not, that's way outside of my scope to be, with diagnosis or anything. But it's interesting, right? Where we get a mismatch between an environment and who the person is, and then these behaviors which are not acceptable for that environment come up. And then it's like, oh, this child, that there's a problem with this child needs fixing, right? Well, really? Can we just get curious for a moment? Can we just pause? Let's take time to understand who that child is. Let's take time to understand how that environment is supporting or not supporting who that child is. And then let's see how we can actually support the child moving forwards and see what they need, rather than just going, this needs fixing.
Yeah.
Because the child's not broken. They actually know what they need, but they don't have, at that age, they don't have the developmental brain, they don't have the cognition, they don't have the skills to be able to express that. And so they express that through their behavior. Behavior becomes a way of communicating that something is not feeling good for them.
Yeah. And then, thinking more about how that process goes, then it's okay. So now we need to fix this in some way, and you need to like go and see someone and get strategies, or you need to, go to that special doctor, or you need to, whatever it is. But it all comes through a lens of fixing, changing, being different. And the narrative that then gets built internally of I need to be different, who I am is not okay, I need to shut that down, I need to watch what is expected of me and do that better. And then of course the behaviors become even more out of whack, because then that's really hard to do, because now suddenly I'm trying to get my square peg in a round hole, and I just want to do it this, and I just want to try that. And
we've got an external incongruency because the environment is not matched to who the person is. And then we're asking the person to be somebody that they're not in order to fit in with the environment. And then we set up an internal incongruency because the child is not being congruent with who they are because they're not allowed to be. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to take a breath.
Yeah. I was going to say, and it's so much when we think about it, it very quickly becomes this, oh my gosh, like runaway mind. And that was, coming back to me again, part of what then happened for me, and I remember standing in my kitchen saying to somebody, but I don't know if I know who I am. Like, I don't know what is true. I don't know what I need. I don't know. I feel like I know nothing about this body that I've lived inside for all of
Mm,
this time and have judged and pushed against and gone with the thing that I'm supposed to be doing, and not just in terms of, jobs and family, but in terms of exercise and food, and like it's just every single layer
mm,
has the potential to be conformed by somebody else's need, agenda, assumption, all of those things.
yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And it really, for me, thinking what a disadvantage you're at if that's not how, the hormones acted on yourself as an embryo, and you haven't fitted into this perfect one way of being, and when I look at my husband, who is an autistic man, and how he's been able to adapt his life and naturally listen to that
Mm,
intuition and kind of carve out a life that suits him very well and thrive. Whereas my daughter is going through the education system at the moment, and that is incongruent with her needs, and the
mm,
struggle that causes. And then, yeah, it becomes autism is a problem to fix. And whereas if we purely looked at her needs, what her preferences are, she's a night owl, always has been, if school for her started later, if, all these other little things in her environment changed, the outcome for her would be so significantly different, I think.
absolutely. You've really nailed it, Emily. And, you know, uh, my both of my children prefer a much slower start, low stress start to the day, and asking them to conform to getting to school at a certain time, going through all of that, that actually creates stress in their system before their system is ready to actually take on that kind of stress. And that has a downstream effect for the whole day.
Mm.
That raises cortisol, and that has an impact on being able to engage in the school environment. If a child is turning up to school before they've even got through the school gate and sat down at their desk and they're stressed, they're not in their prefrontal cortex. They are not primed to be taking in information and processing it and engaging in learning.
And it does feel like impossible in a lot of ways to make these environments, how we actually need them to be. I still struggle. I remember when I first did my mapping, I was, getting up at 6 a.m. to exercise before work so that I could, get that in, then get everyone organized, do all the things. And then I got my mapping done. And I went to bed at 9 p.m. every night because that meant that then I could get up at 6 a.m. And I had this very strong schedule that my body was in. And I'm going to say schedule rather than rhythm because it wasn't rhythmic for my being. It was scheduled to what I believed needed to happen in my day. And then I got the mapping done, and it was like, oh, you're actually supposed, your body likes to stay up later, to take longer to get up in the morning, sleep in, a bit more, start slower. And I was like, no, like I get up at 6 a.m. and I go. And
I remember when you had that kind of reaction. You're like,
yeah. Because I was like, what do you mean? Like, I can't do that. That doesn't make any sense to my life at all. I can't. My body type says I exercise at 4 p.m. 4 p.m.? Like, I'm not going to exercise at 4 p.m. Like, I was like, this doesn't. But it's been really interesting now knowing that information. Now, I still certainly don't have my life designed so that it meets my ideal body mapping by any stretch. But it's been interesting experimenting with moments. And what I'm thinking about is that actually January is often one of those moments for me because I have less work expectations. A lot of appointments and things for my kids step away. And I find myself, and I hadn't actually even realized this, but I'm realizing it now. I find myself adapting my rhythm. And actually, this morning I got up and thought, oh gosh, I've had such a good week. And actually what I've slipped into is going to bed later and getting up later and then going for a lovely leisurely walk and doing some yoga and eating breakfast late, because that's another thing, is that my meals actually are better for me later. And I've been feeling really good. And I looked at my schedule for next week and went, oh, it's all going to change. Like it all goes back to normal next week, you know? So it's really interesting when you can get those moments of stepping into it. But I think that they're enough to slowly start to
Mm.
activate the piece of me that gets curious about, where can I possibly alter that piece, or how could I potentially do that slightly different? And do I actually need to get up at this time of the morning and push myself through something grueling? You know, it's
Mm.
enough to spark curiosity to actually start finding a rhythm.
And I
Yeah.
think what comes up for me there is even just knowing without being able to change, your work or your routine, or you might have to work at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when you're supposed to exercise, but just knowing that about yourself removes that shame from when you can't fit into the routine that society says that you need to be in. And I think
Mm.
that alone is quite powerful.
Yeah,
It
and
is.
even without knowing it, like, people will, there will be people that never know their epigenetic mapping, and that's completely fine. What
Yeah.
I've realized is that I actually had lots of indicators of that I put away because of what I felt I should be doing or what was expected of me. And my body has always responded with a greater stress level when I've pushed hard through all those things. Like, yes, I could get up at 6 a.m. and I could do an intense workout and tell myself that I felt so great. But every single day, my body hurt and malfunctioned in other ways and struggled in other pieces that really were letting me know that the path I was on wasn't actually meeting my body's needs. It was just shutting down the shoulds in my.
Mm. Yeah. And, it really highlights what we know, that the body really keeps the score. Like the body is always sensing, it's always talking to us. And so this this mapping, this lens, it increases our awareness of self, and it allows us to listen to our body much, much more. And if we go back, we started to talk about, autism and ADHD and things like that. If we're talking beyond the neurotype, right? If we take that perspective and we actually look at a person beyond their label, right? Then whether a person is autistic or neurotypical, whether they are ADHD or whatever, however a person identifies, they are uniquely who they are. And we know how to support that person to feel at their best.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, it just takes away so much expectation and judgment and shame, and just allows, a person's spirit to really just live and shine, and for a person to just live their best self and feel their best self.
Mm.
And that's when a person, when a person is able to do that, then potential is unlimited.
Mm. Yeah. And so the encouragement would be, if you are feeling a pull to change the way you work, change, the hours you work, the environment you work in, if you are feeling a pull to stay up later and change your morning, and or the times that you eat or the way that you eat, if something just doesn't quite feel like it matches what you would like to be doing, get curious about it. Like, invite that in as a curiosity rather than shutting it down as a should. That there is no one way, you know, there is no exercise program that is going to be the answer. There is no meal plan that gets people their goals. You know, all these things that come up and you see them so much, you know, on social media and things, they don't exist because we are all individual, and actually intuitively we know what we need. It's just quieting all the other noise to be able to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Lisa, I know that you are taking a little bit of a break from some of your work stuff, but are you still, you know, is there something you'd like to let people know about how to find you? Are any of your pages still active if people wanted to reach out and ask some questions?
Yeah, thank you for sharing and inviting. Yes, so I took the courageous decision halfway through last year because of exactly everything that we have spoken about today, to take a step back from professional life for a period while I focus on supporting my children to really come back into balance. There are a few challenges that we're working through there. And I know that everything that I'm learning right now I will be bringing back to support other families. I will be doing a small amount of work with individuals around personalized health and wellbeing coaching. That will be coming online sort of around the first, sort of around March, April this year. But people can reach me on my email, and I can share that with you for the show notes. I do have socials. I'm not very active on there at the moment, but there is a website coming. So once I have that, I'll be back on socials. But right now, the focus and the energy is within the family, and then all those lessons I'll be bringing back out to share with the families that I support.
Perfect. And we'll just make note of all those things in the show notes, and people can find you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's been a really fabulous conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. For more information on today's conversation and guest, head to the links provided in the description. Please like and subscribe to keep up to date with more content, and it helps us out with the algorithm too. Beyond the Neurotype is not a licensed medical or mental health service, and any information or advice given is general in nature. Please seek professional help if anything mentioned in today's episode has raised questions or concerns.